Katie?
What do you say?
Don't worry about it.
Okay, so what are we debating?
He's a Christian, yeah.
Why theism is true.
Okay, so all right. So prove God exists. What is your evidence for why God exists?
Well, first we have to prove that there's some necessary being, okay?
What do you mean by that?
By necessary being, I just mean some entity that exists, that could not fail to exist, right?
Okay. So could you prove that some necessary being exists?
Yeah, of course.
All right.
1 second, let me just tell something. So, do you accept the PSR?
I don't know what that is.
All right, so the PSR is just, well, there's many different versions of it, but let's say that let's use a version like this, right? Every fact has some explanation for why it is the case.
Okay.
Right. There's no things about the world, right, or statements about the world that are just
Hold on, give me a second.
completely unexplained, or at least unexplainable.
All right.
Okay.
What were we saying?
Yeah, so there's no facts that it just in principle could never be just
Okay.
have no explanation.
Yeah, I can agree to that.
Okay. All right. Do you know what I mean when I say a contingent fact?
Something that is dependent on something else, like a fact that's dependent on something else.
No, it's not really dependent. It's just saying that it could have been false, but it's true, but it could have been false.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, suppose we had all of the contingent facts about the world, all the things that could have been, that are true but could have been false. Is there, and take those all together, right? So that we could, I mean, we couldn't do it because there's so many of them, but perhaps infinitely many. But
Okay.
we could suppose that there's some statement that states that they're all true, or all these facts are true, and that statement itself is going to be another contingent fact. So, like, we have this fact stating all of the other contingent facts. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Just skipping over some potential problems there. All right. So, does this fact have an explanation? Well, given
I don't know. Like, I don't know what the explanation would be. No.
No, we don't. It's not a question about whether we know it. It's about whether the thing, in principle, is explained by something else. But the principle sufficient reason that you seem to agree to at the start was that every fact does have an explanation, right? It's not about whether we have that explanation, but in fact there is some explanation for it. So, but that now when we consider the conjunction, like of all these contingent facts, right, it follows that there is some explanation for that fact.
Okay.
Why it is true. Okay. Well, what could that explanation be?
The explanation to the fact that all contingent facts are what exactly?
That all the contingent facts are true, that they all obtain.
Well, how do we know that the fact that all contingent facts are true is a true fact itself?
Because it's just a conjunction of a bunch of true statements.
Like what? Like, hold on. What do you mean by that?
So one of the contingent facts might be that you exist, right? Or something. Mm-hmm. And all the rest of the statements about the actual world are going to be contingent facts, or at least all the contingent ones are going to be contingent. All the ones that could have been false.
Okay, so basically, how do you determine like we know things to be true?
This isn't really concern of epistemology, right? I mean, we could
I think it is.
not really, because we could grant that we don't even know anything at all, right?
Yeah, that's a part of epistemology.
Right. But I mean, unless you're denying that there are contingent facts, or if you're denying the PSR, then whatever.
Define contingent facts one more time for me, please.
Yeah, things true of the actual world that could have been false in some sense, in some logical sense at least.
So what do you mean by could have been false? Like, how could they not have been true?
Well, I mean, so informally, we'll just say something like, "You exist, but like you could have not existed." Like, another way the world could have been would have been such that you didn't exist in it. And I don't know. We can talk about logical possibilities.
So wouldn't the fact that all contingent facts are true be explained by the virtue of like the external world? So like saying we exist or I exist, right? That's or just a connection of all contingent facts. That's based upon like the external world, right? Because they're like contingent upon it. So affirming or saying the fact that all contingent facts are true, wouldn't that also just be dependent on the external world? Like saying
some of these facts in this big conjunction of contingent facts are just going to be stuff about the external world. Everything, assuming those things in the external world are themselves contingent, like they could have been otherwise.
Yeah, okay. So that's why I brought up earlier, like, how do we determine what is true, right? Because I was going to bring up, like, this would also have to do with our perceptions, right? Because
But the argument I'm making doesn't really concern itself with what things are true, like what the contingent facts are. All we have to admit is that there are some contingent facts, even if we don't know what they are.
I'll admit that, yeah.
Okay. So we have some contingent facts, and we've accepted the principle of sufficient reason, which is that every fact has an explanation for its being the case. So, and let's not say that we know the explanation, but there is some explanation in some sense.
Okay.
And it also not to say that we know what the facts are that are explained. Right.
Okay.
Although, I mean, arguably we do know some of those facts that are true, but I mean, that's not really required for the argument. So we have, again, I'm considering the set of, well, I don't know if that language is going to be good, but
Can I ask you, like, can I just try to guess what your argument is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the fact that all contingent facts are true, the explanation to this would just be a standard, and that would be God. Is that what you're trying to say? Is that what you're trying to lead up to?
No.
Okay, then what are you leading up to?
What I'm leading up to is that the fact that fact is true entails, because of the PSR, that it has an explanation, because it is a contingent fact, and there's something that explains it.
Okay.
Well, if the fact that explains it itself is contingent, then it's going to be among the set itself, and that would mean that the set is somehow like explaining its own truth. But that seems wrong, right? You can't have circular explanations seem improper. Okay.
Yeah.
So if it's not a contingent fact that explains it, then it has to be a necessary one.
Okay.
Because those either all true facts are either contingent or necessary. So we have some necessary fact, something that had to be the case, that explains why the set of all contingent truth is true.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, okay, this is something I don't. Well, this is okay. I'm saying something I don't exactly agree with at this point. Well, I've said many things I don't agree with, but I'm going to say something that I don't quite agree with at this point. But so we have some necessary fact. What could that fact be about, unless it's about something that's necessary, some necessary object, entity?
Why does it have to be an object or entity?
Well, I mean,
that just like, I think that's kind of like a false dichotomy. I don't think it has to be specifically an object or entity.
Well, it has to be about something that exists, right? I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
Why can't that be like our perceptions? like our sensory perception.
Well, we don't want to say that our sensory perception is the thing that's going to be necessary, because
Yeah, I think that's necessary to explain all contingent facts. I think that is necessary to explain all contingent facts, or the fact that all contingent facts are true.
wait, but you don't think that like humans had to exist, right? Like it seems to me that
I
maybe,
don't think that had to exist. No,
but then, so had
Had
humans
to.
not, well, then it just seems to me that that can't be the necessary fact, because
No, I don't. Well, your question was, do you think humans had to exist not for any specific like reason? I don't think we just had to exist in general, but in order to have contingent facts, I think we had to exist. That's what I'm saying.
so if you think that had humans not existed, then there wouldn't be contingent facts at all.
Yeah, I don't think we would. There would be nothing. There would be like no knowledge, nothing to derive it from, because knowledge is just based on the sensory perception.
But then you don't think anything would exist, let alone humans.
Yeah, because everything is dependent upon the mind.
I mean, I don't know. It seems to me that I can imagine a world where there were, say, planets, but life didn't happen to develop or be created or something like that. Like,
Yeah, but that's like dependent upon your mind. Still, like it still would fall under like that same logic.
No, what I'm saying is, why couldn't the world have been that way? That's
Why couldn't world like have existed without the mind?
Right.
Well, I mean, I'm not talking about like an ontological or metaphysical. Like I'm talking about just in an epistemic stance that we wouldn't have any contingent facts that would exist. Like no contingent facts would exist without the mind. That's what I was trying to get at.
I would agree that we and perhaps nobody would know any of the contingent facts. But that's not.
Well, there'd be nobody to know anything, right? If humans didn't exist.
Yeah, but note that I'm not saying a contingent fact requires a mind to conceive of it.
I still think that like life would develop and like planets would exist or whatever, right?
Okay.
But I don't think that we would have any contingent facts to base like or like necessary facts or anything like that or any knowledge at all.
Right, but I'm not. So I would agree that if there were no minds, then there's no knowledge, right? But I'm not saying. I don't think something being contingent is dependent on a mind. That's not how it's described, right? Okay. There just is a fact of the matter about whether something logically had to exist or
but
not.
I think
not going to be dependent on a mind for that to be the case.
Well, the explanation to the fact that all contingent facts are true would just be our sensory perception. That's the explanation, because that's where we derive all of our knowledge from. Like we can't know anything that we did not get from our sensory perception.
No, but then you're in the same position again. If you think that contingent facts if the necessary explanation for contingent facts is our minds or sensory perception or whatever, then it seems to me you're committed to the view that minds are necessary.
Yeah, minds are necessary for facts, but not like physical existence. Okay, so do you think facts are physical or like concepts are like physical?
Well, we're not really debating that.
Well, like you kind of made the implication that you would need like a mind, or like you don't need a mind for these things to exist, meaning that they must be physical because only physical things can to be true.
Right.
Well, you would need like a mind to like for them to like exist at all, or like to determine if they're true. That's what I'm saying.
Right, but that's just a matter of something knowing it's the case. Right? But you don't think that something being true requires something that knows it's true, right?
I think to determine if something is true, you would need a mind.
So determine in one sense, in sort of like a epistemic sense, like a discovery sense. But it's not like the mind is making it the case that it's true. It's not like the mind is fixing its truth.
Yeah, like it's how we make the distinction of if all contingent facts are true, right? How we can like even claim that we would need the mind, or we would need our sensory perception, right?
But you think that it's, just to be clear then, you say that to know that it's true, you need some mind, sure. But for it to be true at all, you don't need a mind.
Well, yeah, I can agree with that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
I just think the mind is used to determine if it's true or not.
Great, but that's an epistemic concern. That's how we come to know that it's true. Requires us having minds or something like that.
Okay, so what is your original question?
Well, then the question is, can you have? Well, so we're looking for some necessary fact that explains the set of contingent facts. I mean, we don't know what it is, but it seems to me that if it's a fact about anything at all about the world, I mean, it has to be about some thing or things that are necessary.
Well, I don't know how you determine it's like a thing or like entity. How do you like class? Like,
Well,
what
okay.
led you to that?
What sort of facts might we state that aren't about anything at all? I don't,
Well, you're saying that like
all like facts have like nouns, right? They're about things usually, right?
yeah. But
So
do you mean thing as in like entity or something else? Like, what do you mean by as in thing? For saying
well,
that.
we'll leave it as a primitive, like just something that exists. I mean, maybe we can't go any deeper than that.
Okay, something that exists. Okay, so I wouldn't know what it is then. I wouldn't know.
Well, I agree that we wouldn't know. So if we're granting that this necessary fact includes in it something that exists, right? Just some necessary fact about something that exists. Then, I mean, we agree that we don't know what that is, but nevertheless, it kind of follows that there's some necessary thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's kind of the first step of the argument, is to show that, well,
Okay.
for there to be an explanation of all these contingent facts, and since we do think there is one from the PSR, then there has to be some necessary thing. I mean, we may have no idea what that is, but we think there's something that exists necessarily that couldn't have not existed.
Okay. So, yeah, I'll agree that there's like a thing that exists that explains, like, that's necessary, that explains all contingent facts. Sure.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I guess from this point we can start asking, what are some of the potential properties that this necessary thing could have?
Also, before we do that, what do you define as God? Like, what is like a definition of God?
Sure. Roughly speaking, a powerful, knowledgeable, mind-like entity that created the rest of the.
Would you define God as a personal agent? Well, has the attribute of personhood? Because that's like a pretty common like attribute of God.
I'll be a little bit hesitant and just say that God has some person-like attributes, but perhaps is quite different than normal persons that we're aware of. All right. But I mean, we can revisit that if it comes up with agency and personhood.
All right, sure.
Yeah, so I said powerful, knowledgeable, mind-like, and created or perhaps grounds like the universe or something like that.
All right.
Yeah. That's kind of like a vague definition of God that I think is.
Yeah, it works. It works.
Yeah, I mean, we can discuss more specific attributes, but I guess, and there's other things we could say are not true of God. For example, God is not, located in space-time. For example, he's not some machine.
Are you arguing for like just a creator or like any specific religion?
We'll see how far this goes.
All right.
So let's see, where was I? Yeah, so we can start asking, what might we, what might some of the attributes of this necessary thing, whatever it is, be? Because at this point, all we've agreed to is that something exists necessarily, but I don't know, maybe it's nothing like the definition for God that I just gave. So, well, one thing. Sorry.
Oh yeah, continue.
So, do we think that this thing could be material, like made out of matter?
Well, I wouldn't know. Like, I wouldn't know if it's like immaterial or material. Like, I wouldn't know, and I wouldn't know how to determine if it is material or immaterial.
Sure. Well, one reason to think that it can't be made out of matter is that we think that matter is contingent in some sense. Like, it seems to me that matter depends on certain laws of physics and space-time and so forth. And maybe it just seems to me that the world could have been different so that
So could it be made of antimatter?
I'm including antimatter as a sort of matter.
Oh, okay.
What was I saying? Well, yeah, it just seems to me that the world could have been such a way that there just wasn't any matter at all. I mean, maybe there just isn't the space-time, or maybe the world is a very different sort of thing, where there just isn't any matter. So, if matter isn't necessary, then the necessary thing couldn't be made out of matter, because
It makes sense. Yeah.
right. And other things we say about matter is that, like, well, it's located at certain positions in space, but location at a certain point in space is in some sense contingent. Well, okay, that's not a good argument, but but someone might argue like that as well. All right, so this is at least some reason to think that this necessary thing isn't a material thing. Probably a little bit, but okay. I think a similar sort of argument might be made to think that it's not a thing in space or a spatial thing. Because perhaps space is another thing that might not have existed.
So, but what if it's just like a higher, like dimensional level, like a higher level of space that like this thing came from? It wouldn't be our space, but it would just be like higher level of space. Like, I think there's just too many factors that we don't know to say it is this thing or is another thing. I think we just like it's inconclusive. I don't think we know enough. Like, we don't have enough knowledge about this to like give it any definite attributes without being just kind of a guess.
Well, let's suppose, I mean, it has, like, exists in some 10-dimensional space. But then we'd have to say something like this. 10-dimensional space just has to exist, necessarily. But that, I mean, that seems kind of strange to me. Like, why couldn't it seems that there's a consistent world that's just like a 3-dimensional space. And similarly, it seems to me that there's a consistent world that's some other dimension of space entirely. So it would intuitively, it seems not to be the case that some particular dimensional space is necessarily existing. But if some dimension of space isn't necessarily existing, then, well, we could say that the necessary thing, whatever it is, might exist regardless of dimensionality of space. But then we'd have to say something like it could exist in a one-dimensional space and still somehow explain all contingent facts.
Yeah, I think there's just too many factors. It's too like ambiguous.
Well, I'm not going to make too much of an argument here, but I'm just going to say that my intuition is that space didn't have to exist. I mean, perhaps space is just a product of various physical laws that themselves are contingent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and if space didn't have to exist, as matter didn't have to exist, then the necessary thing can't be spatial because that would be like there's some way the world could have been such that there's no space, but nevertheless this necessary thing existed. Well, if there's no space, then the necessary thing can't exist in space, and therefore can't be spatial.
Yeah.
Well, if it's not,
Could he just be like 0-dimensional then?
well, it may just be incorrect to talk about the dimensionality of it. Like maybe it's
Yeah, it makes sense. Sorry.
yeah. Let's see here. Okay. I'm kind of just making stuff up on the fly. Let's suppose we have. Well, we don't know what this thing is or how it explains all the contingent facts. But if it explains all of the contingent facts, it seems to me that, like, in some sense, it has to be kind of like a powerful thing, right? I mean, if it was just some completely inert thing that didn't do anything in the world, in what sense would it be explaining all of the contingent facts? So we have to think that it's, or it seems to me that we should think that it has some degree of power or capacity to bring things about in the world. Because otherwise, in what sense would it be explaining all these? Could it factor in an explanation for all these contingent facts? All right, so we think it has some degree of capability in bringing things about. I mean, even if it's just bringing about some of those contingent facts, which themselves lead to explain all the further ones, it's still fairly powerful. Can bring about everything at all. So, what could I say about mind? Let me think for a second. I gotta come up with something. What does Rasmussen say? He has some argument here.
Use the disembodied mind argument.
What argument?
Oh, no debate.
I don't know if I want to go through all sorts of theory of mind stuff.